Hello, my grieving friend. It's Lisa. Whether you're a longtime listener or you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. I'm so glad you're here. By now, you likely know I'm passionate about exploring the nature of grief. As a narrative therapy trained social worker, a grief activist, and a widow, I'm dedicated to helping us learn to be in relationship with our grief instead of running from it. In our modern culture, we've pushed grieving into the shadows, something to be experienced privately, causing us to suffer unnecessarily and in isolation. Grief is our human inheritance. It offers us medicine if we tend to it as a community. So, together with my extraordinary guests, and this season answering your questions too, we're changing the narratives of grief, one conversation at a time. This may seem obvious, but I wanted to remind us all that the news of Rob and Michelle Reiner's murder, the shootings at Brown University, the massacre at Bondi Beach, the daily mass shootings in the US, they're all happening to real people with real families. Each leaves behind grieving individuals and family members whose catastrophic loss is overshadowed and muddied by public attention and speculation. Whether strangers on the internet or close friends, we often inflict additional harm on them by saying insensitive or cruel things, or perhaps worse, not showing up at all, leaving them feeling stranded on a planet of their own. Today's guest, Michelle Hord, knows this all too well. Soon after filing for divorce, her husband murdered their 7-year-old daughter, Gabrielle. She was immediately confronted with the unbearable pain of being a bereaved mom, stunned by the actions of someone she once loved. As a producer for Good Morning America, she had to do it all in the public eye. And she joined me on the show a few seasons ago to explore her story and her extraordinarily powerful and inspiring memoir, The Other Side of Yet. In the wake of the Reiner's death, Michelle was invited by O Magazine to share her reflections on what we owe the grieving, which resulted in her beautiful essay, which we'll explore today. There are no words, but here's what we owe the grieving anyway. My friends, I can't believe I get to say these words again. Welcome, Michelle Hord, to Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast.
It is so great to see you, and I feel like this is a class reunion because we met on your amazing podcast and just immediately found a kindred sistership,
Yeah.
and text and stay in touch now. So I'm grateful to you and your platform that we had a chance to really get to know each other.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, y'all, there's some fun text threads going on between Michelle and I and another friend of ours. I brought you back to the show today, not just because I love you and I love your wisdom, and I think you have so much to share with our audiences, but I think because we're recording this in a particular time where there is so much devastating loss in the public eye, violent loss in the public eye. And I've been wanting so desperately to explore some of the themes that I think we as individual grievers, if we've experienced it, or certainly just as witnesses, as fellow humans, as whether we are friends, we are very central or we are far off, we're also impacted. And I know that you know so much about what that is from your lived experience, which is what had you writing this gorgeous essay recently for O Magazine, There Are No Words, but Here's What We Owe the Grieving Anyway. I usually, guests, I ask people to talk about this grounding early memory of loss to help us understand our grief beliefs. So if you haven't listened to our original episode, listeners, you can go back and listen to Michelle's answers then, which were very, very profound. But I think I'm curious maybe to start with a slight variation on that question today, which is, knowing what you know now, observing the world, our culture still to this day, what I would argue is still a grief illiterate or grief avoidant culture. What do you think are some of the most harmful grief beliefs sort of writ large that we still carry as a collective, as a community that you're seeing? You touched on some of them in your essay, which we're going to dive into, but what do you think are the most harmful grief beliefs many of us still carry that we might want to think about setting down?
Yeah, I think there's the two far ends of the pendulum. There is the don't say anything. If you bring it up, you're going to upset them. Just tell them how great they look. Just move on. If you move on, they'll move on, right? Which does not acknowledge grief, and can make a griever feel like there's something wrong with them, that that everyone's staying quiet about it and not saying anything. And then the other extreme is being all up in the business, right? Just to add a little levity to a conversation
Yes.
like this,
Yeah.
where people assume they understand where they bring their own strange comparisons of loss in to try to connect. Those are kind of the two extremes that I think still exist. I have to say something, I have to do something, and I can't say anything. I can't do anything. And it's interesting, as different as those are, to me, it feels like that it's still teeter totters back and forth between those.
Yes. Oh, Michelle, I so appreciate you showing up with the sort of paradox or the dichotomy that so many of us face. And to your point, though, I think they are all kind of two sides of the same coin in that it shows us how little practice we have at showing up and holding space and bearing witness for one another. But I also think it shows those two extremes, the sort of, I don't want to say anything. Oh my gosh, I'm going to say the wrong thing. So I'm going to not say anything. Or the like, let, I need to know all the gory details. Let's talk about them all the time. Are reflections, I think, besides our grief avoidance and our grief illiteracy and our unwillingness to recognize that 100% of us will experience grief and that we're all going to die. This is the opposite of the levity you were just trying to bring there. But I think the underneath belief, I'm curious if you see this too, and I think you touched on it beautifully in your essay, is the underlying myth or grief belief, as we call it, myth of the grief belief, that it's our job to fix the griever.
Mhm.
And so we cling to these, I'm not going to say anything because I don't know how to fix you, or I'm going to just get into the details so I can somehow rearrange them in a way that is going to make this make sense, which a violent death doesn't make sense. And so it's about that sort of core missed belief that it's our job to fix the griever or that grief is a sign that you're broken. Does that resonate for you? What do you
It
see?
definitely does. One, if I'm broken, you can't fix me. Um, and two, spoiler alert, it's actually about you. It's about your insecurities. It's about your fear. Depending on how you've lost someone. Yeah, I lost my mother suddenly, natural causes, but a sudden illness when I was 24 and she was 50. And then I, of course, lost my daughter violently when she was 7. And for very different reasons in both cases, I dark humor joked that people were afraid they could catch it, right? Like if this
Yes.
happens here, at 24 to lose a parent suddenly, your friends are kind of freaked out, like, oh my gosh, my mom's 50 as well. She's 51. And then as someone who is a fairly regular, normal, air quote, person in society, PTA mom, all the things, to have what happened to me with my daughter, it really exposes, and I think a lot of what's happened, unfortunately, in our country in recent weeks and months, it exposes that dark space that says, could this happen here? Could this happen to me? And so part of what people are reacting to is not what they're seeing or hearing about someone else. It's about what it makes them question about themselves and their relationships and their health and their circumstances. And then also, and I do really believe this, and it's a little tough, but I think it's true. If you can just give, if you can put yourself in 1/1 millionth of the uncomfortable position that your grieving friend or family member is going to, it's about vulnerability. And so it's not about you at all. It's not about what you can say. It's not about what you can do. And so I do truly believe, when I think about one of the most honest things anyone can say, is there are no words. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, because that is showing up vulnerable, right? That's showing up
Yeah.
saying, okay, I think I'm going to screw this up, but I want to be present.
Yes.
And even said in that way, and, I'm not going to say anything is 100% unilaterally, but for me, friends that showed up like that, I appreciated the honesty.
Yeah.
I appreciated that they were willing to, despite their egos and their own insecurities, kind of just stumble and fumble through it and have me say, yeah, no, no, okay, maybe that. It is a journey, right? It is a grief journey. Being willing to just be present for that journey, however it's showing up today, is where a lot of people miss the mark.
Yeah. Oof. Y'all, did you hear so many mics dropping just there when she was sharing your wisdom? I want to pick up on one thing that you said that I think I'm curious, even if you have lived experiences that you might want to share before we sort of get into the presence part, which I think is really at the heart of what your essay in O Magazine was about and our conversation today. But that was the how people, and again, if you've I say this all the time to the listeners. All of us have had said the quote unquote wrong thing to a griever, even those of us who sort of know more now. So just if you, we're all in the club, so we're all in the family here. So I have this show, we do this work so that we can have more practice, being better. But the thing that you said there was when people come to try to fix, to try to say thing, because to your very valid point, they're really wrestling with the fact that now this has shown a light on a dark corner of possibility in their own lives, that they say things that make it about them. I call that being the grief thief. It's one of the
Mhm.
ways in which we are a grief thief with each other. Not for their intention. I don't
No.
think it's the conscious, like, I'm going to go make this about me. And yet the harm is there. Did you experience that in particular? I mean, you mentioned, of course, your mom passed suddenly when you're, 24 years old. That's a very young time to lose your mom. But you also were as you said, a regular PTA mom in your community, but you're also sort of you work in the media business. You have some exposure there in the world. Is there something that comes to mind around something someone said that shifted the energy in the room to them, or that you still sort of ponder on? Not that you're holding a grudge per se, but just that really still strikes you as like, oof, I wish that hadn't have happened or that wasn't said.
Yeah, and I think it's probably very specific, maybe not though,
Yeah.
to losing someone violently, um, to a crime. We are in a society today where your top podcasts, a lot of them are true crime stories, right? And people, as a form of escapism, choose those spaces. Not judging, just a fact. And so, what I found, and from as varied sources as someone who I would meet on an airplane to literally my primary care doctor that I never went back to someone that I was on a mission trip with, people are so curious, and in a macabre sort of way that they just ask inappropriate questions. Um, Part of it may be that because I'm a communicator for a living, and because of how I show up and how my grief shows up, I protect that inside and kind of send my representative to the world.
Yeah.
And so perhaps it would be easy to think that my emotions are what they appear to be. But this was my little girl. This was my 7-year-old little girl. This was my life. I didn't read this. You're not watching Dateline. And
Yeah.
it just never ceased to amaze me when people would literally say, so how did it happen? How did he do it?
Did you
And
see the signs? I think you
yeah,
said to me
yeah.
before.
Did you
Yeah. Did
see
you?
the signs or did anything?
Yeah.
And, a lot of times I said, Google it. If you really need to know, go Google it. You
Yeah.
can find it online. But, people just, and again, I don't think it was ever meant to be painful or hurtful, but we're so curious about things that we don't know about or understand, that you sometimes can get tripped up into the space of asking really harmful questions.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and again, listener, if you've done this, just instead of beating yourself up or becoming defensive, I invite you to just pause and just take a moment and to say, I wonder what the learning opportunity is here. You know, in some ways, I would say, of course you did, because we live in this grossly, voyeuristic culture that makes us feel like we're entitled to everybody's insights. And I think, too, we And I would label myself as one of the most curious people in the world. And yet, I think sometimes we use curious as a cover for discomfort, for my fear, for my overwhelm, and that those questions come from a way so that I can ask you a question, so that I can other you, so that I can make myself feel rest assured that it can't happen to me. And there's a real, instead of feeling connected, which is what we want to do for the griever, I see you, I hear you, I'm holding you in my heart. This is how I sign off my show. We, in a way, do the opposite. And I wonder if you felt that kind of othering, that kind of distancing from those questions, or just other ways people showed up in the grief, especially in the wake of Gabrielle's death. Like, did you feel that
Absolutely.
othering? What did you notice? How did that show up?
And, the irony of starting my career at America's Most Wanted, doing missing children stories, and
I know.
working in television news for so long, um, where people become these kind of one dimensional victim archetypes, right?
Yes.
And we believe they are what we've read or what we've heard. Yeah, I lived that through fellow moms who were friends who either were distant or who I heard whispering to other people in line at a coffee shop. You're absolutely right. It is the othering that gives some level of comfort or reprieve to the person that's asking the questions because it can't happen here, right? So you must
Yeah.
be somewhere else. You
Yes.
must be dealing with something else. You must be, because it certainly can't happen here. Uh, percent. Yeah. And, it re traumatizes. It re traumatizes the person.
Yeah. What have you learned over these years since her death about how do you then protect yourself, maybe is the word I'm looking for, but how do you guard your heart given that we're still lagging behind, so many of us, and people probably still to this day are asking invasive questions? What have you learned for you? I'm just thinking of all the listeners here who've experienced a violent or traumatic death in their life. How have you learned to sort of, without, walling yourself away from the world, but I don't know, protect your heart, I guess is the question I'm thinking of.
I had a really, really dear friend who also is a television producer. Um, a month after I lost Gabrielle, and it was way too early, but she was 100% right. She said to me point blank, "You're going to have to develop your script." Um, and by that, she meant, what are you comfortable saying that you can say without feeling when you have to? And, one of the things that I think I certainly still grapple with is Gabrielle is still present for me every day. There's a picture of her behind me. I wear a necklace with her name. Her picture is on my phone. So in the world, she shows up and people naturally ask the questions that you ask when you see a cute
Yeah.
kid or you see a name on a heart. And so I've had to develop, depending on the circumstances, um, what I'm okay saying. And, part of that is indicating that that's all you're going to say,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, it's something like, you know, Gabrielle was my daughter and I lost her tragically several years ago, and it's really difficult to talk about. Um, I my husband jokes with me. I've remarried in the past few years, and my husband jokes with me. He's like, "It's just amazing how often you have to protect and take care of people who are learning about your trauma." Um, and that is this strange sort of thing that happens, right? Like, I see the bus screaming down the street. They don't see it. They're in the middle of the road. I know it because I watch it every day. And your instinct to almost want to protect them, the poor car
Yeah.
driver or the poor person next to you on the plane. Or at least that's mine. I won't say
Yes. Yeah.
everyone's, but that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
I struggle with. And at the same time, setting a healthy boundary and saying, they walked into this, though they get to walk out and I don't. So let me make sure I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah. Michelle, I so appreciate your well, I appreciate the courage it took your friend, even if maybe the timing wasn't right, your fellow producer to offer you that. That's certainly something I've learned in my own grief and loss experiences. And yeah, I mean, one of the chapters in my book is called People Say Stupid Shit. And you know, and so and part of what I offer too is this idea of this. First of all, you don't owe everybody your story. So even, by the way, sometimes your answer is, I'm not comfortable discussing that with you.
Mhm.
And you don't even get the fact that you had a daughter or whatever. But I think it's the remembrance of that. And also, to your point, although I encourage us to be with our grief and to tend to our grief, not everybody deserves to hear our story. Not every time is appropriate. And maybe we don't have the bandwidth emotionally. And so I love this idea of sort of a script that maybe varies on your proximity to me too, right? Like the stranger on the plane is not privy to the kinds of things maybe your old college friend that you're reconnecting with, or even, a close neighbor or something like that. So there's
Absolutely.
discernment, that there's like having the script, and then there's the discernment in how do you deploy it and when. But that it's
Yes.
yours to deploy. And I think your husband is so right. It's such a weird thing as a grieving person of any kind of out of order death or any kind of loss. I just wrote a poem that included this line. It's like our instinct to say, when they'll say, I'm sorry. And our instinct is to say, it's okay. Like we're there now to comfort you. Even if
Mhm.
they're not trying to grab, the
Right, right,
microphone, it's just,
right.
yeah. So you're wrestling with that still even? How do you
Absolutely.
not overly take care of other people?
I struggle with that.
Yeah.
I really do, to be honest with you. And, I think the piece that because my life has changed dramatically a lot in really good positive ways since I lost Gabrielle. But I think it's the grappling with the two things can be true, right? And feeling okay, being joyful about things in your life that you feel really good about, and that doesn't in any way take away from this painful, painful loss you live with every day. When I think about the holidays, I now have a little baby boy. And so, of course, thinking about him, thinking about Christmas with him is wonderful. And all 7 of the Christmases I had with his sister are still present. And so, I think what's so interesting to me is how grief continues to evolve as your life evolves and changes. And, year 1, what I needed and what I asked for is dramatically different than year 7, year 8. Um, you know, eh, and giving myself that grace that
Yeah.
I'm trying to no one has it all figured out, right? We're all on these personal journeys that twist and turn in ways we wouldn't have imagined. I still am surprised by some of the things that personally impact me,
Mm.
or don't, So I think giving myself grace to feel how I feel and to always be okay with setting boundaries that keep my feelings safe. Um,
So
Still very
huge.
much goals.
Yeah. I mean, I think these are, life's our life's works. I mean,
Yes.
I've been reframing a lot of kind of my what some people would call like your health goals or your
Mhm,
as just practices. Cuz
mhm.
then it takes the pressure off like that I'm going to arrive somewhere and
Right.
be
That's a
perfect at
great way to
something.
put it.
So, I've been thinking about what are my grief practices or just my life practices. And then when I catch myself maybe not holding a boundary or um I might say to myself instead of like, "Oh, Lisa, you fell down on the job again, you moron." My inner narrator is sometimes
Mhm,
a jerk.
mhm.
I'll say, "Oh, this is an opportunity that reminds me I have more practice. I need more practice at the
I
boundary."
love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to
So,
borrow that.
yes, please do. Please do. I love that practice. We'll be right back with more of this beautiful conversation. Now, as much as I love hosting this show, and I absolutely love it, what I love perhaps even more is being with grievers, both online and especially in person. Throughout the year, I'm grateful for the chance to offer grief support to individuals, bring grief education to organizations creating grief smart cultures, and inspire audiences at large events like TEDx and Endwell. And all of that happens because of listeners like you. As we head into 2026, I'm really excited to share that I'll be offering more events and retreats. And what's top of mind for me today is a beautiful week-long retreat I'll be leading this April, where your sorrow will be held and witnessed through sacred practices in the healing embrace of the natural world at Wilcatica in the heart of Peru's Sacred Valley. You heard me right, Peru. The retreat is for individuals, couples, even small groups seeking a tender holding space for their sorrow. And it's open to all forms of loss, personal, community, even collective grief. There are still a few spots left, so if you'd like to learn more and reserve your spot, visit lisakefauver.com after today's episode. That's Lisa, KeeFauver.com. You touched on joy, which I want to make sure we get to before we end our conversation today, in part because so much in your gorgeous memoir, The Other Side of Yeah, you talk, of course, a lot about resilience and joy. And I have some curiosities too. But we're recording this December 22nd. So just before the holidays, it'll probably come out the first week of January. But we're also recording this just soon after the murder of Rob and Michelle Reiner, um, allegedly by their son, Nick. And it's, of course, kept and happened at a time with lots of other devastating public deaths and murders, shooting at Brown University, the murders at Bondi Beach in Australia, and others, of course, that don't get the news. But I think all of us listening, watching, you included, us included, whether you've experienced a violent death or not, were taken by this. We were taken by, well, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for other people. I think we get called into trying to imagine and what can it possibly feel like to be at the center of that storm? And how would I show up if I was a distant friend, a friend, even just how do I show up as a person in the world who's a fan of that person? And you took to writing this gorgeous essay, as I mentioned earlier, for O Magazine called There Are No Words, but Here's What We Owe the Grieving Anyway. And I wondered if I could read a passage from it and then just get you to talk a little bit more about the power of presence. Would that be okay, my friend? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
But you all need to check this out, the original on O Magazine. You said, witnessing this kind of catastrophic loss forces others to reconcile with the unimaginable. It asks them to admit something they'd rather deny. Someday it may touch them personally. And when it does, when someone you love is suddenly living inside a nightmare, your instinct will be to fix it, to explain it, to rescue them from the unbearable. That impulse is fundamentally human. It can also be harmful. Catastrophic loss cannot be fixed, but your presence can help. Presence is not performance. It's not a sermon, a theory, or a tidy meaning making exercise. Presence, I love this line. Presence is the decision to stay near someone when you can't fix what happened.
Yeah. One of the most powerful things I experienced, a dear friend of mine was just starting the process of a long, horrible, nasty divorce when this happened. And she had lost her mother to cancer just 6 weeks before we lost Gabrielle. And I remember her just being there and saying, I don't know what I have to offer. I don't know what to say, but I will sit with you in it, whatever that looks like right now. And in my mind, the courage and selflessness to do that. And to be okay if one minute it was, I really should go out for a walk. And the next minute it was like, you know what, screw that, I'm going back to bed.
Yeah.
And being okay, not having investment in an outcome, but just experiencing with me. If that's turning on a silly movie, if that's talking about it and crying until, our faces are red. So there is something just really beautiful and divine about being present in the moment and not in your head, not looking for the right thing to say or the right anything, that uncomfortableness of just being with someone, um, and allowing yourself to walk in it with them for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. first of all, just as your friend, I'm so glad that you had a friend who was able to do that because I think for many of us, I think of all the grievers I work with, a lot of the people, unfortunately, that I work with didn't have that one person in their life. They had the people in their lives who were telling them to get out of bed, who are telling them they have to be strong for their other kids, or telling them they need to move on already. It's been, X number of months or years. So, on the one first, I'm just glad that you had that. And second, I think you speak to what we've been touching on all along, which is it's the energy with which we bring, not the words. And it's also having no intention. It's not having the right intention because the right intention is I'm going to fix, I'm going to help, I'm going to do. And I'm not saying, by the way, doing practical things doesn't help a griever because it does.
Mhm.
I would not have eaten if my friends did not leave groceries on my porch. Um, so, yes, we all are for that. And you're really talking about a kind of holding space and of acknowledging I can, even in my discomfort, even in, by the way, if it's not perfect, that I can hold the terror. I can help you bear the unbearable and really help you carry the weight of it for a while. That's what we owe to one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and you wrote so beautifully in there. I mean, there's so much more to what you said, but one of the things that I was thinking about, I'm curious your again, in the light of what happened to Rob and Michelle Reiner, but in what happened to you. But, I know our listeners and the people that I work with have experienced various forms of death by addiction, death by suicide, death in the public eye in different ways, automobile accidents, etc. And I'm curious what do you wish people understood about what it feels like to be in the center of that? Especially when there's kind of, it may not be national, international news like Rob Reiner, but it might be your local newspaper or at your local synagogue or church or temple. What do you wish people knew about what it felt like, maybe even in the early time, to be in the center of that storm?
That there's more than 10 feelings. There's shock, there's loss. If it involves a family member, the way mine did, there's betrayal, um, confusion. It just trying to intellectually process something as unimaginable as your husband killing your child is is hard to fathom. And so, especially in the early days and weeks, there's so much just even logistically that one would not think about that comes with crime of police and maybe reporters somewhere and maybe the fear of seeing or hearing something in the news or hearing I think that's her or that's him. I was so touched by I believe Rob and Michelle's 2 other children, and the statement they gave, and the word that I remember really strongly was humanity, like an ask for our humanity, and, what I think that means is just give them space to try to begin to grapple with this horrific lifelong journey that they're starting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, from a press standpoint, from a personal, just give them the space to try to figure out where to put their first steps. Because when something like this happens, it's like there's darkness everywhere and there's noise everywhere. And you need to get quiet enough to find like a pinprick of light
Yeah.
to move towards. And when you're balancing logistics that no one else can do, whether that's interviews with law enforcement, all of those things, to the practicalities of planning
Funeral
for a
arrangements.
funeral, right.
Yeah.
There is not extra space. There's not enough space for what you have to do, let alone to deal with other
Respond.
people's response. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, that's all I've been thinking about lately. I mean, I think about this often, of course, because unfortunately we live in a world where there is, gun violence every day, all kinds of violence too, is how much unnecessary suffering we're causing the griever with all of our speculation and our wonderings and our digging up old, they said this one time, and I can't say that I don't consume the news, so I do, and so I am a participant in that way, but it never I don't ever not think about that when I'm consuming something, whether it's somebody speculating or even the energy it took his 2 kids to have to write that in the middle of the unimaginable that they're having to imagine. I think if we all that's why I wanted you to share your own personal story. It's like, I think if we could all start by touching into the humanity of the surrounding family members of a tragedy like that, we might behave with a modicum more of, um, compassion and patience. It's not ours to try to figure out the answer, right?
Absolutely. And in a situation like mine or like that of the Reiner family, you don't just lose the person or people who are killed, you lose the perpetrator,
Yes. Yeah.
who is probably someone you did or do love, in the most horrific type of betrayal. So the level of complexity, I've said at times in my journey, missing Gabrielle was not the hardest part. There were other things, crazy as that sounds,
Yeah.
that were just unbearable, that I didn't feel like I should have to deal with. That missing her, being able to miss her with so many layers down from logistics and
Yes.
all these other things, that my ability to just sit in how I felt without my daughter really took some time.
Yeah.
um, I took me 2 years to get divorced from the murderer. It took 2 plus years to go to court. I mean, just, um, being free and clear of all of that hanging over my head so that I could really give myself the space to think about what it meant to live without her.
Yeah.
It was almost like 2 years of pure shock.
Yeah. Oh, Michelle, I think that's such an important um, aspect of again grief with tragedy or grief in the public eye. Because for whatever your kind of loss, our bodies do this thing called shock, which I always say, thank you, body, because we can't possibly absorb it all at once. But for many of us, the shock wears off slowly over the course of weeks and months, maybe, a year, but it takes time. But when you're laden with the details of a criminal case, responding to public conjecture, all of those things, it's like you can't even it's this other layer of fog that is getting in the way of what we're really meant to do, which is to figure out how to live with and carry and build the musculature to bear the weight of this loss. And so, just my heart goes out to you and to everyone who's unnecessarily having to sort of dig through the layers to get to that place, which is both beautiful and excruciatingly impossible. And yet we do it. We're just talking now too about like maybe all of us in the sort of outer sphere who are watching this from afar. Maybe we met him once, or maybe we just loved and watched all of his films. Maybe it was somebody who knew you. What do you wish now? I'm curious, the people who are closest in. So if Rob and Michelle's friends are listening, if the friends of our listeners are listening and they've gone through something, what do you besides show up and be present, which of course is critical, is there something else you wish they would know?
Yeah, I think it's so important by that people who were personally impacted to take care of themselves. You can't, as much as you want to be there for the person that's perhaps more directly affected, if you do not take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to be there with them in the way that you want to. And I remember my childhood best friend who was Gabrielle's godmother. Her son was my godson, was graduating from high school like a week or two after this happened. And, us having an honest conversation about her needing to see a therapist, that she was traumatized too. And I think that people that are one or two rungs on the outside, it seems selfish, or how can I talk about how I feel when this person is affected so deeply? And I'm not suggesting you necessarily share it with that person unless
No.
they, say
Yeah.
that they're willing to do that. But you do have to honor the fact that you've lost something too, and give yourself whatever you need so you can be there for them. I mean, it's very much like the airplane, put your oxygen
Yes.
mask on first, right? That holds true in these scenarios as well with loss.
Yeah. So beautifully said, Michelle. I think um, I always I often say, yeah, you have to do your own work. Part of the reason I think many of us struggle at being great grief supporters is because we haven't learned to tend to our own grief from other losses, let alone maybe the grief that we're also experiencing as the friend of, or the neighbor of, or the cousin of the sort of primary griever. And what happens when we don't do our own work is we come in with all of our own um, grief so that we now are at the center of everything. But also, we come in with all of where we started the show, the unpacked harmful grief beliefs that we still hold, that there's something wrong with us if we don't hurry up and move on. And so, yes, um, I love that you were able to have this kind of honest conversation, yeah, with your friend to say, like, I think yeah, you need somewhere to process this. And I want to emphasize what you said. You said it very nicely. You were so kind, like, probably not with me. And I'm going to go with definitely not with you. We know that grief support, like, we offer support in and then we seek support out. This is what we know about the sort of zone of where we seek support. So do your own work, seek your support, but not from the person closest in. But to recognize that you might think at first, this is selfish. I say to you, listener, this is anything but selfish, because part of why we have intergenerational trauma and we have these grief beliefs that pass on from generation to generation is because we don't do our own work.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I just so appreciate you giving that gift. And you talk about that again in the O Magazine article about what do we want our friends to know about how we do and don't show up and what it takes, and then also sort of the outer world, sort of the more distant, removed world. I can't not have a conversation with you, my friend, and especially again in the context of what's happening right now. I mean, beyond just globally, culturally, what's happening in these times, about your commitment to joy and resilience, which again, I think is something that we share. I want to just open up for, like, what do you think? How do you see resilience and joy? And of course, being me next, I want to dig into, like, do you see, this is what I see, but I'm curious to what you see is like the way in which we weaponize resilience in our culture too. So it's the both and. I'm always going on about the both and. But first let's start with the, like, what does resilience mean to you? What does it look like for you? Why is it, and I'm using resilience and joy. You can pick one or both, but how is that shown up? Because somebody might hear your story and be like, how can this woman be resilient and have joy, or and given everything that you've gone through? Those are the kind of cliche things people come at us with when you've experienced their worst fear. We'll be right back with more of this beautiful conversation. More than ever, my friends, I'm passionate about creating meaningful community and offering you more insight into my work and even into my life, too. I want a place to explore topics in depth, expand my creative expressions through things like long form essays, and even maybe some audio and video guided practices. I want to be able to share some behind the scenes moments from the podcast and maybe even eventually host a Dear Lisa column. Most importantly, I want to build an authentic, interactive community off social media. Life is happening so fast, and I want a place where we can slow down, dive deeper, and figure out how to metabolize it all together. And I'd love to have you join me. That's why I launched my Substack, AFCO with Lisa Kiefhofer. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about it in my book or from the stage, or maybe even here on the podcast, AFCO stands for Another Fucking Growth Opportunity. Yes, of course, I had to get in a judicious use of cussing. Rest assured, my friends, like in all my work, I'll show up authentically, offer thoughtful, meaningful, and practical guidance on how to center aliveness in a world full of loss. I really look forward to your comments, our chats, creating special audio and video content for you, and more. And if you'd like things delivered to your inbox, don't worry, AFCO with Lisa Kiefhofer will come directly to you. You can sign up after today's episode at afco with Lisa Kiefhofer.substack.com. You can find it in the show notes, or if that's all too much, just head to my website, lisakiefhofer.com.
Resilience is not the ability to overcome. It's not the ability to get past, right, or to get over. Resilience is the ability to keep going despite whatever it or they are, right? And I think it's so easy. And, I feel sometimes, frankly, that, I can't walk and chew gum or add or subtract, but I can talk good, right? Like I'm a communications professional. And because of that, it's very easy to misinterpret. And I'm sure you deal with this as well,
Yes.
that somehow because I have the words to articulate how I feel, that I'm so strong, that I'm so over it. And, resilience, and it's interesting to look at it, what it means in a business sense, right? Is how able is this thing, this economy, this sneaker, whatever,
Yeah.
able to deal with the inevitable shifts and stretches and turns and maintain?
Yes.
That does not in any way suggest that you're over. It's through. How do you continue on through? And so that's important to me because I find sometimes people will say, oh, well, you're so strong. You know, I think that unless you've walked in my shoes, you don't know what it took. And you may have in you what you need to get through what you're going through. There are no grief Olympics, like we all have our journeys and our walks. And I think there is, if you are mentally healthy, that there are things you can call upon, um, professionally, spiritually, to help you gain resilience,
Yeah.
resistance, just like muscle training offers to grow resiliency. And, there's neuroscience that says there's a neuroplasticity that we can, in fact, broaden or open our ability to be resilient. So, my first thing is the myth that there are super people that just somehow or the other,
Yeah.
can walk through walls and you either were born with it or you weren't, because that ain't
Yeah.
the truth.
No. It's a muscle you practice. I mean, we're back to practice again. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, when I think about hope and its proximity, let's say to joy, I named my company Hope Warrior because uh, I'm going to forget the artist's name, so forgive me. But an artist whose work I followed in the Bahamas, where my husband is from, after one of the major hurricanes, start a series called Hope is a Weapon. And I loved, especially if something has happened to you, the ability to be empowered. So when I think of hope as a weapon, I think of joy as like a, a radical campaign, and I'm starting to pivot to write about radical joy because I think not happiness, right?
Yes.
Happiness is
Different.
to me like being hungry or not hungry, in a superficial way, hungry and not
Yes. Yeah.
hungry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And joy is a choice. Joy is a choice, and it's a radical choice at times if the present situation or circumstance does not seem to be joyful. How do you still choose to fight for joy? And I think it is probably the single most important thing we can do for ourselves and those around us is to consciously fight for moments of joy and try to string them together despite what's happening
Yeah.
around you.
Yeah. I mean, joy, hope, it's a balm to the weight of terror and tragedy and despair. Um, in fact, I think it is the tool or the weapon that helps us carry. If I didn't have a way of practicing resilience, of seeking hope and joy, I wouldn't be able to build my resilience and to carry the weight of everything that I've endured otherwise. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. I so appreciate you saying resilience is not about getting over it or moving on or
Mhm.
putting it behind you. It's really about learning how to carry it, how
Yes,
to integrate it, right? How to, as you said, sort of that flexibility metaphor. How do we flex and spend? So important in so many ways, including the fact that we're never going to go back and be the person that we were before, but that doesn't mean the person that we are in the after is broken. It's the work that we do to figure out how to metabolize along the way. What Oh, so many directions I wanna go, but before we leave joy, I wanna come back maybe a little to the kind of way in which I personally witness, especially in the workplace. I know we both share this, we both do a lot of work in workplaces. So I wanna get to a little bit of the way I personally see systems weaponizing resilience, in ways, and how do we counteract that? But I can't not ask you, what are your I call it being a joy detective. So, like, what are your joy detective skills? Where do you you don't have to give us, like, intimate details, but, like, where do you lean towards, or what do you call in so that you can, um, embody hope, embody joy in your life?
for me, art brings joy if that's something visually or hearing something or reading something, that momentary escape. Because sometimes when you've been through something that makes you feel othered, the ability to have a collective experience, if that's at a comedy show or at a concert or looking at a painting, takes away some of that othering.
Mm,
That I like you, I'm laughing at this joke. Like you, I'm sort of swooning at this beautiful song, right?
yeah.
It
We
makes you
can
feel like
relate to these lyrics in the
that's
song, even though
exactly
we don't
right.
know each other. There's a
Yes.
common humanity. Yeah.
Yes, because when you've been through something that feels just freakish, you feel like you're part of the freak show for, as people look at things. So I think that's really important. And helping others, I have found, um, again, I think because it's empowering, the ability to do something that gets outside of you that perhaps can offer a little happiness to someone else brings you joy. It
Yes.
really brings you joy. And that can be paying for the person behind you's coffee at Starbucks. It can be cooking for, whatever that looks like for you. But one of the things that I think saved my life, and I'm not overstating it, was starting to do work in Gabrielle's honor, to help other children. That first Christmas where I was in Belize on a mission trip and holding, little girls that were about the weight she would have been, was both heartbreaking and resurrecting in knowing that I was giving these children something that they would not have otherwise. So, I do think, and it's very personal, right? I don't
Yeah.
know that the ways one derives joy are
No.
universal, but, for me, art, experiencing beauty, and trying to offer beauty and love to someone else feel powerful and feel joyful.
Yeah. So many themes you brought up there, my friend, that I think are so important to amplify. One is that it's not the same for each of us. And really, the invitation is get curious for yourself then. We know it
Absolutely.
matters. How it looks, what it looks like is different than the necessity there. And then also this notion of sort of being in service of others, or being outside of yourself. Um, Listeners probably heard me say this before. The last couple years, starting around, I think it's before around my cancer diagnosis, I give away flowers once a week to a stranger. And is it nice for them? Sure. Is it incredibly meaningful for me to see the look of joy and surprise and delight on somebody's face every week? Absolutely. 100% selfish. I will claim it. Yes, it is absolutely that. Um, I think it's so important. To me, this notion that you brought up, especially about art and music, I feel this way deeply about poetry. I also feel this way about nature, is the reason that there's hope or joy or some solace is in this thing that you're not alone. You know, that a poet understood, even if they didn't go through your thing, they understand what it felt like to be confused by a world that didn't have your loved one, or to be broken hearted by a breakup, or nature, that nature is, co-mingled with one another and we are a part of it. There's just something about rooting or grounding ourselves in the context of um beyond us that is so important, because while it's important to look inward and acknowledge our own feelings and be with our own pain, we can't linger there too long. We can't linger there too long because we have to recognize that we are a part of a bigger world that also experiences joy and also experiences, heartache.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's so beautiful. I so appreciate that. Um, I am curious to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing in workplaces. We've talked about it, of course, in our text threads a little bit, but for our listeners, um, because I'm curious to know. I think the question I have for you is, I've been doing work for years, specifically around grief education in the workplace, but before that, it was out, burnout and mental health and my mind, how we bring mindfulness practices. And yet, and I love every company that I've ever worked for and will work for. And yet, we live in a culture, we live in capitalism, we live in productivity, we live in systems that do and don't have bereavement care, for instance, or do and don't have time off, that can cause so much harm on top of the harm that the grieving person or the traumatized person is already experiencing. And so while I think for me, I always go in and offer, you know, here's how you might change your policy or practices and educate you on how to look at your grieving employee in a different way. I also often push back against and also, what are your policies? What are the systems in place? What are you doing to cause more harm than good in your places? What are you noticing as you go in and talk about trauma informed workplaces in terms of, you know, companies' willingness to learn and also companies' willingness to sort of hold themselves accountable maybe for their participation?
Well, and with your same disclaimer about loving all former, current, and future
Yeah.
clients, I think that our maturation is still at a point of reactive,
Yes.
that something has typically happened or is happening, and wanting to bring this education in is a result of that. I think that is sort of the evolution of the work. Other things, whether you talk about diversity or, there are other
Yes.
things where over time they went hopefully from being more reactive to being a part of, a
Culture.
business
Yeah.
culture. Um, but, it's interesting that since COVID happened, there has at least been this collective understanding of grief and loss where before there wasn't. And I've said, and I really believe this, like my book deal wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for COVID. And I say that because it provided this universal understanding of something that was impossible happening. And that fear that comes when something impossible happens, what else can be true? Right? When the realm of reality has shifted. It certainly did in my personal life. It certainly did in your personal life, but we all
Yeah.
experienced it collectively as we were stuck in our houses watching other people stuck in their houses on television. And so I feel like that and what came with it was the beginning of us, one, acknowledging that the world is not Severance where people get in an elevator and forget everything from the outside, right?
Yeah.
As much as, we've been taught that that's the case, that seeing a dog run by in the background or hearing a kid in the corner inserted some of the realness and humanity that we're all dealing with. It brought us closer together, like that poet, like that art, right? Um, and so because of that, I think there's more of a willingness with leaders in smart organizations to understand part of being, there are all sorts of things that make you a good leader, right? You want to be able to deliver feedback. You want to have, clear vision and mission. And one of those things should be the ability to navigate um, through something unexpected in the workplace. Not that you'll have all the tools, but that your business, the same way HR is set up to have the tools when there's a layoff, when there's
Yeah.
a hurricane, that this becomes part of the toolkit that exists to help leaders through difficult situations. When I lost my daughter, I had a team of 90 people around the country. People who, she sold Girl Scout cookies to, people who
Yeah.
obviously knew me personally. And so it does not just touch
Yeah.
the person or the immediate family, right? It really touches, depending on a role or the organization, it's a very wide reach. And so acknowledging it broadly, creating ways, sincere ways for people to get help, ask for help, creating a safe space for someone who's coming back into the workplace after something has happened. Those are all so incredibly important. And I
Yeah.
feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg of starting
Yeah.
to acknowledge that.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, as I said, I've been doing this for years. Some organizations are better equipped, typically the organizations where a senior leader has experienced something themselves. Unfortunately, it takes often their own loss to do that. But we know grief leadership is important, not just for the well being, of course, of the people impacted, but of course, it has this sort of economic impact on the company too. And also, I say this all the time, and this applies to the workplace, but I want to tie this back to this applies to how we act in our churches and our synagogues and our communities in our neighborhoods, which is like how you as the neighbor, the friend, or whatever, show up or don't show up. So, same thing like the leader, talk about or don't talk about the fact that one of your employees just experienced the most horrific thing that happened to them. Other people watch what you do and don't do. And more to the point, they watch. I mean, goes back to my usual original question about the implicit and explicit. Your fellow employees and also again, back in the world, your neighbors, your friends, they watch whether you make an announcement or not. Do you give the person time? Do you acknowledge it in the company newsletter or in your, do you show up acts of care? If it happens to you as a leader, do you take time off? Like, we learn by what we're watching happen and not happen. And so I think this is important for all of us, whether you're listening as a leader in your organization or the neighbor or the friend, right?
Absolutely.
You witness that. Yeah.
And I think one of the great things leaders can have is authenticity and the ability to be vulnerable. And that there is nothing wrong for a leader to say, this has happened to Michelle. I'm heartbroken. I know you're all heartbroken. I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to fill in the blank, right? And to just be transparent and sincere about where they are, to show, listen, you don't always have your emotions on your sleeve as a leader, but I think
Yeah.
in those moments, it's really important um, to be able to acknowledge pain and acknowledge grief because you're, to your point, sending a signal to the people around you that it's
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that it's okay to feel how they're feeling.
Yeah. Well, and also again, this is again sort of the parallel that happening in the workplace and happening out in the world is the loss isn't just centered around you, the primary griever. I mean, you just talked about the web of maybe 90 employees who had some feelings about her, Gabrielle in particular, of course, about you. Also, then wondering, I'm sure, how is this going to impact our workplace? And then that web happened for your friend who was her godmother, right? And like she's impacted, and maybe even other people in her life are impacted. Her son was impacted. So we can't, whether you're doing your grief work for your own personal growth or for your friends or for the employees that you supervise or the colleagues that you work with, this is just such an important reminder, Michelle. The essay you wrote in the conversation that we had today about the interconnectedness, and that no one is going to escape it. So then let's lean forward and figure out how to hold each other in a web instead of feeling so separated from one another.
Absolutely. There, um, if there's any beauty in the ashes of grief, it is the ability to hold hands with the people around you who are also experiencing it, and just have that shared experience honestly, without guilt, without judgment.
Yeah,
And that's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful.
absolutely. I think we need, I'm going to say this, I'm not going to drag you into believe this, but I believe so much of um, the pain and the heartache and the violence that we're seeing inflicted on one another is coming from a place of unprocessed grief. And so when I say that grief literacy matters, when I'm out here talking on stages, you do the same, we're in workplaces, it's not just because, oh, I experienced these losses and I want you to know about it. No, it's because I think the all of the unhealedness, all of the unattended to grief is having this ricochet effect in a way that I think we've really lost control of. I don't know if that resonates for
Absolutely.
you. Yeah.
No, it does, and it shows up as fear. It shows up as drawing lines in the sand and setting new boundaries to push others further away.
Yeah.
100% I agree.
Yeah.
And the other thing, just really quickly, I think that's important is there are all sorts of griefs, right? There can be grief when your husband gets relocated and you're leaving the town that
Yeah.
you've grown up
Yeah.
in. There's grief when a child doesn't do what you thought they were going to do. Like, there are so many levels of grief. And I think when people are talking to someone that's dealt publicly with a catastrophic type of grief, they tend to downplay
Yeah.
what they've been through. Listen, divorce is traumatic, cancer is traumatic, job loss is traumatic. I think the most important thing is for people to be honest about where their grief sits currently and to
Yeah.
process it,
Yeah.
and to not be ashamed of where it takes them, or how the journey evolves. Because being honest about that, like you said a few minutes ago, takes away some of that scarring that's just tearing the world up right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, my friend. Well, what a treat it is to spend an hour with you here in conversation on Grief is a Sneaky Bitch podcast. I know for sure it won't be our last, probably on the air and definitely not off the air. But my
Absolutely.
friends, Michelle Hord, her beautiful memoir, The Other Side of Yet, her most recent essay in O Magazine, There Are No Words, but Here's What We Owe the Grieving Anyway. And I hear you might have another essay coming out soon. So make sure you can check the show notes from today's episodes to find links to all of the resources about her beautiful writing, about how you can work with Michelle directly. My friend, thank you for joining me for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
In addition to being, well, an incredible human and a professional badass, I'm so lucky to now count Michelle as a friend. And as you heard, she continues to metabolize her own pain in a way that allows her to show up so beautifully for others. And today that included you, my dear listeners. Now, speaking of listeners, as promised, this season I'll be answering one listener question at the end of each episode. Today's question comes from Courtney.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Courtney. Um, my daughter's name is Riley. She was 17 years old and was murdered by a coworker in a place that should have felt safe. It's been a long 2.5 years through my grief, through the criminal justice system, learning to advocate for myself, a tribute to being able to advocate for patients. I'm a NICU nurse. I've been a NICU nurse for 17 years almost, and it helped give me some tools to not only advocate for myself, but for my daughter, for her friends, even. But with that, it has a hefty toll. I always feel like I'm in fight or flight, doing some threat assessment um, with just the people that are around me. And I'm kind of wondering what tools there are to mitigate some of that fight or flight when you come with a boatload of primary and secondary losses along the way.
First, Courtney, please know that I'm holding you and Riley in my heart. I want to acknowledge how exhausting it is when your baseline state is operating out of hyper alertness and hypervigilance. One thing I've learned navigating the world in the wake of my own traumas and working with others is to start by thanking your body for showing up for you. I know that seems counterintuitive and maybe kind of strange, but it's important to honor the way our parts are showing up to protect us and keep us safe. This is part of how I believe we have to love our way into healing instead of judging or shaming our way there. Now, that said, there are several therapeutic practices and personal rituals that can help right size your relationship with alertness and vigilance. That includes things like somatic therapy. We explored somatic experiencing with its founder, Peter Levine, on the podcast last season. You might want to check that out. It also includes trauma informed therapies like EMDR, which have helped me reduce my startle response, as has regular mindfulness and grounding practices. I want to offer you a simple everyday technique I use, honestly, when I notice my hypervigilance rising up, and it still does. First, of course, assess if you really are in danger. But once you've determined you're safe, I'm inviting you to place a hand on your heart, to rub and tap your chest a few times as a signal of care to your body and as a signal to take some deep breaths. As you do it, I encourage you to speak kindly to yourself with words like, "Thank you for trying to protect me. It's okay, sweetie. I'm safe." Courtney, I'm sending you so much love. Now, listeners, you can send in your question via a maybe minute to minute and a half max voice memo to info@lisakefauver.com. And while I can't answer them all on air, please remember, if chosen, your voice and question will be included on all podcast platforms. If you loved my conversation with Michelle today, learned something from her, please consider sharing the episode with someone you love. We'd also be so grateful if you took just a few minutes to head to the show page on Apple Podcast, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review about what the show means to you. Until next time, dear listeners, I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding you in my heart.